Imagine living in a grand, luxurious mansion, only to realize its entire foundation rests on your neighbor's land. A mere tremor across the border, and your sanctuary begins to crack. This is the stark reality of the Canadian economy's reliance on the United States. Over 75% of Canadian exports head south, with roughly $2.6 billion in trade flowing across this border every single day. Canada is not just a partner, it is an organic component fused into the massive American machinery. But this symbiosis is morphing into a dangerous trap of dependency. When US inflation forces the Fed to tighten monetary policy, or when America First protectionism rises, Canada immediately enters a state of red alert. The Canadian dollar CAD fluctuates violently, and the Bank of Canada BOC is forced into a frantic race with the Fed's shadow to prevent capital flight. We are faced with a haunting question. Is Canada truly a sovereign economic nation? Or effectively the 51st state, holding its breath for every decision made in Washington? A sneeze in DC leaves Ottawa with a severe case of pneumonia, and that fever is already spreading through grocery bills and mortgage payments across the Great White North. This dependency is so profound, it has become a ticking time bomb within the national financial architecture. Signs of a dependency crisis are most visible on the balance sheets of Canadian households. While Americans underwent a painful deleveraging process after 2008, Canadians plunged into a borrowing spree fueled by an unshakable faith in real estate. Today, Canada's household debt-to-disposable income ratio has surged past 180%, a record high within the G7, as the Federal Reserve maintains high interest rates to curb inflation. The Bank of Canada BOC finds itself in a classic catch-22. Failing to mirror US rate hikes would cause the CAD to plummet, driving up import costs and inflation. Conversely, matching them threatens to trigger a domino effect in the domestic housing market, the primary engine of the nation's GDP. Government bond yields and credit default swap CDS spreads are beginning to show abnormal volatility, reflecting international investor anxiety regarding Canada's systemic resilience. Hot money is quietly exiting Toronto and Vancouver, seeking sanctuary in higher-yielding US debt-denominated assets. This is no longer a theoretical forecast. These are physical fissures threatening the stability of a banking system once renowned as the most conservative and secure in the world. The mechanics of this economic shock operate like a transmission system without shock absorbers. Because the Canadian economy is heavily weighted toward natural resources and raw exports to the US, any shift in demand from New York or Texas creates an immediate butterfly effect. When America sneezes, liquidity in Canadian financial markets tightens instantly. Consider the bond market. The narrowing spread between Canadian government bonds and US Treasuries makes Canadian assets less attractive. Once confidence wavers, a downward spiral begins. A weakening currency inflates business input costs, eroding profits and triggering waves of layoffs and spending cuts. Most dangerous is the shadow dollarization of market sentiment. Investors have begun pricing Canadian risk based on Washington's variables rather than Ottawa's fundamentals. This dependency strips the government of fiscal autonomy, rendering national economic policies reactive rather than strategic. Canada is operating in an orbit where the most critical economic levers are held by hands outside its own borders. Global economic history is littered with tragedies of nations over-reliant on a single partner or asset class. Consider the 1997 Asian financial crisis through the lens of the IMF. Nations like Thailand and South Korea collapsed when foreign capital fled overnight due to a loss of faith in currency pegs. Look at Argentina or Turkey, where hyperinflation and currency devaluation wiped out the middle class due to interest rate mismanagement and reliance on foreign-denominated debt. Even in Europe, Greece became a victim of a common monetary system lacking fiscal unity, leaving them defenseless when the crisis hit. While Canada possesses better governance, the nature of the risk is identical: a lack of diversification. While Venezuela collapsed on oil, Canada is betting its future on an overheated housing market and a single export destination. Compared to highly open economies like Switzerland or Singapore, which prioritize risk diversification and maintain record fiscal surpluses, Canada reveals lethal vulnerabilities in its long-term economic defense strategy. The direct impact on the Canadian economy has moved beyond statistics. It is now woven into the country's value structure. Manufacturing sectors in Ontario and Quebec tremble at every US election cycle, knowing a single executive order on tariffs could erase thousands of jobs instantly. The energy sector in Alberta, despite its vast resources, is strangled by a lack of transport infrastructure and price control from refineries south of the border. This creates a paradox. Canada exports cheap crude to the US only to import expensive refined gasoline back. This asymmetry erodes the trade balance and puts permanent pressure on the CAD-USD exchange rate. Furthermore, the brain drain to US tech hubs is stripping Canada of its innovative drive. When young talent see significantly higher wages and opportunities in the US, Canada unwittingly becomes a free incubator for its neighbor. Consequently, Canadian labor productivity continues to lag, creating an ever-widening wealth gap with the US and pushing the dream of an independent knowledge economy further out of reach. Faced with this suffocating pressure, the Canadian government and the BARC are performing the most dangerous tightrope walk in history. The typical response is a caution bordering on conservatism. The BARC often opts to raise rates a beat later than the Fed to observe the fallout, but this lag often costs the market dearly in stock and real estate volatility. On the fiscal side, the government increases public spending to stimulate demand, but this only exacerbates national debt and pressures sovereign credit ratings. Housing support packages and social safety nets act like temporary painkillers, soothing public anger without addressing the root cause: a lack of competitiveness. While Ottawa attempts to sign new trade agreements like the CPTPP to decouple from the US, logistical hurdles and technical standards make the process move at a glacial pace. The inconsistency between tight monetary policy to fight inflation and expansionary fiscal policy to maintain growth creates a counterpull, leaving the Canadian economy like a car with the braking gas pedals pressed simultaneously, straining and unstable. For the average Canadian, the primary strategy is geographical asset diversification. Holding a portion of one's portfolio in US-do or international equities is no longer a luxury of the rich. Shifting from variable rate mortgages to long-term fixed rates is a critical defensive move to avoid payment shocks. Instead of sinking all capital into domestic real estate, which sits atop a bubble waiting to burst savvy consumers, enhancing professional skills to allow for remote work for international firms is another way to export labor and earn hard currency. Individuals must build their own micro-financial fortresses where exchange rate volatility cannot instantly collapse their retirement plans or their children's educational future. At its core, Canada's economic subservience to the US is not just a story of geography or trade, but of mindset. For decades, Canada chose the path of least resistance, clinging to the world's largest consumer market next door instead of venturing into distant markets. This systemic complacency has sapped Canadian businesses of their drive to break through. When compared to Nordic nations' economies, with similar populations but home to global brands dominating various sectors, Canada appears significantly overshadowed. The real insight here is that the artificial stability provided by a giant neighbor has caused Canada to lose its independent survival instinct. It is a wake-up call that the economic model based on resources and neighborly protection has reached its end. Without standing on its own 2 feet through technological innovation and partner diversification, Canada will remain a satellite in the US orbit, sharing the fate of the superpowers' fluctuations without the right to self-determination. History's lessons are notoriously harsh. The collapse of economic empires often begins with overconfidence in bonds that appear durable but are fundamentally brittle. Canada is at a crossroads. Declining productivity, indices, and record household debt are red alert sirens on the national economic dashboard. If a deep recession hits the US, or if Washington enacts radical tariff reforms, the Canadian dream of a prosperous, equitable society could vanish like morning mist over the Rockies. We have seen developed nations fall into decades of stagnation, like Japan, or prolonged instability like South American states when they fail to adapt to a new economic order. Canada requires a genuine overhaul, from an education system focused on future skills to policies that incentivize domestic venture capital. This is no longer the time for ideological debate. It is time for the most pragmatic strategies to decouple. Extreme risks from the south before the link becomes a noose, tightening around the future of an entire generation. Closing the curtain on the Canadian economic landscape, we see a nation caught between borrowed prosperity and existential risk. Dependency on the US has granted Canada decades of stable growth, but the price has been the loss of strategic autonomy. As the world shifts toward a multipolar order, putting all your eggs in the United States basket is no longer a wise gamble. Interest rates, exchange rates, and housing prices are merely surface symptoms of a deeper ailment: the lack of an independent economic identity. Canadians will face agonizing decisions in the coming years to restructure their financial foundations. Do we have the courage to endure a difficult transition, cut spending, and invest heavily in actual productivity? Or will we continue to sleep under the risky shelter of our giant neighbor? The final question is not for politicians or economists, but for you, the ones directly operating this economy. If the southern border closed tomorrow, or if the USD were no longer the absolute king, what would be left of your Canada besides overpriced homes and unpayable debt?